There's a transaction inside every relationship you have. You just never read the fine print because you agreed to pay before you understood what was being taken. Nobody told you the terms. Nobody sat you down and explained the cost. You were young and you were watching the way children always watch. And you learned something without anyone teaching it. You learned what made the room warm and what made it cold, what made people move toward you and what made them pull back. And from that learning, quietly, without ceremony, you made a decision that would shape every relationship you'd ever have. You decided to pay whatever it cost to be kept. It didn't feel like a transaction then. It felt like growing up, becoming easier to be around, learning to read the room. You softened your voice when someone needed you smaller. You swallowed your opinion when the table needed peace. You converted your irritation into a joke, your grief into composure, your anger into accommodation, and people responded. They relaxed around you. They called you easy to talk to. They kept you close. And that felt like love. So you kept paying because the alternative, being yourself and losing them, was a price you weren't willing to consider. Carl Jung called the self you constructed through this process the persona, not a mask in the theatrical sense, something more total than that. The persona is the entire identity assembled from the feedback of other people. Every adjustment you made to be received better became a permanent fixture. Every authentic edge you sanded down left the surface smoother, and the approval came faster, and the smoothing continued. The mask wasn't vanity. It was a survival strategy. And the tragedy of survival strategies is that they work until they become the cage. Now, let's talk about what you actually spent. Not your time, not your energy. Those are recoverable. What the transaction took was more specific than that. It took the sentence you started and edited mid-breath because you saw something shift in their expression. It took the disagreement you converted into a question so it would land softer. It took the moment you laughed at something that diminished you because laughing was easier than the conversation that wouldn't. It took every room you walked into and immediately assessed, who needs what from me? What version do I perform here? What do I minimize to make this work? It took the need you had that you dressed up as indifference so thoroughly that you eventually forgot you had it. It took the boundary you never drew because drawing it would have required revealing that something had crossed it. It took the desire you buried before it was ever spoken because speaking it would have meant being known, and being known meant being rejected for something real, not just for a version you could revise. That is what was taken, piece by piece, interaction by interaction, so incrementally that each individual cost felt like nothing, and the total cost felt like everything. And here's what the unconscious mind, that vast, ungoverned interior Jung spent his life mapping, did with all of it. It kept it. Nothing you suppressed was deleted. Nothing you swallowed was digested. Jung called what accumulated there the shadow, not the dramatic darkness of someone capable of evil, but the mundane darkness of someone who has been betraying themselves for years and knows it. The shadow is the filing cabinet of everything you weren't allowed to be. And like any debt left unpaid, it doesn't sit quietly. It accumulates interest. It comes out in the disproportionate fury you feel when someone cancels plans last minute, the rage that doesn't match the offense, because it's carrying 20 other offenses you never acknowledged. It comes out in the resentment you feel toward people who take up space without apology, who say the thing directly, who ask for what they need without dressing it up, who occupy a room without calculating the cost of their presence. You don't just notice them. Something in you tightens. Something almost hostile rises. Not because they've done anything wrong, because they're doing freely what you've spent years convincing yourself you didn't want. It comes out in the self-contempt that arrives after the smallest self-serving act, the moment you choose yourself and immediately punish yourself for it, because somewhere very early, the lesson was absorbed that your needs were an inconvenience, your desires were excessive, and your existence was most welcome when it required the least from everyone around it. The shadow doesn't announce itself. It leaks, and the longer the transaction runs, the more it leaks into everything: your sleep, your body, your closest relationships, the quality of your own company when there's no one left to perform for. Now the turn. And this is where the script of your own life has been lying to you. You believed the transaction was earning you something real. Every approval collected felt like evidence. Evidence that you were worth keeping, worth loving, worth the space you occupied. You built an entire internal court case around it. Exhibit after exhibit. They included me, they praised me, they chose me, they stayed. Proof, you told yourself. Proof that you matter. But Jung's concept of projection exposes the fraud at the center of this. The people applauding you, they were never applauding you. They were applauding the performance. And the performance was designed specifically to produce that response, which means their approval tells you almost nothing about your actual worth and everything about your skill at concealment. You have been building a case for your own value using witnesses who only ever saw the defense. The defendant, the unedited, unperformed, genuinely complex person underneath, was never called to the stand. The self-deception required to sustain this is extraordinary. You had to convince yourself the approval was real, that the connection was genuine, that the warmth people felt toward you was toward you, because the alternative was a reckoning you weren't ready for. The alternative was admitting that you had made yourself invisible inside your own life and called it belonging. And then, at some point, the transaction collapses. The relationship ends. The role disappears. The job, the status, the social world you quietly assembled your entire sense of self inside gone. Or more quietly than that, someone whose opinion you needed without ever admitting you needed it simply stops watching. They move on. They get busy. Their attention drifts. And in the silence that follows, something surfaces that should concern you more than it does. You don't know who you are when there's no one to perform for. The instinct, for most people, is immediate and unconscious. Find a new audience. A new relationship before the previous one is fully cold. A new group, a new role, a new version of the persona slightly adjusted for a different room. The speed of that search, the desperation beneath it, is worth sitting with because it reveals the actual terror that without the performance, without the validation, without the external confirmation, there might be nothing stable underneath, that the transaction wasn't just how you related to others, it was how you related to yourself. Most people never sit in that silence long enough to find out if the fear is true. Most people locate a new mirror before the old one finishes breaking. But here is the inversion, the thing this entire video has been building toward without announcing it. You were never performing for them. Go back through everything, the softened opinion, the buried anger, the need disguised as indifference, the desire never spoken, the approval collected like evidence. You believed this was about other people, about managing their perception, surviving their judgment, earning their continued presence. That assumption is wrong. The people were never the audience. They were the mechanism. Jung's understanding of projection, turned completely inward, reveals this. You were never seeking their validation. You were seeking your own, and you didn't trust yourself to give it. The approval you chased from your father, your partner, your closest friends, every room you carefully performed inside, you needed it from them because you couldn't access it internally. You outsourced your own verdict because sitting as the judge of your own worth felt impossible, too dangerous, too likely to confirm what you feared most. Other people's approval was never the destination. It was the only road you knew to a place that should have been reachable without leaving yourself at all. The transaction was never between you and them. It was always between you and yourself. You were the debtor. You were the creditor. Every softened sentence, every swallowed truth, every performance given to keep the room comfortable, paid not to manage them, but to avoid the one judgment you couldn't escape, your own. The mask was never built for other people. It was built to hide from yourself. And the price of being liked, the real price, the one running underneath everything, was paid by the only person who was always present, the only one who watched every performance from the inside. You. Jung called what comes after this recognition individuation, and it needs to be said plainly. This is not self-improvement. Self-improvement is making the persona more convincing, the performance more polished, the transaction more efficient. Individuation is the decision to stop transacting entirely. That decision costs real things. Some relationships exist only because of what you were willing to perform inside them. Stop performing, and there is nothing left to hold them together. Some people in your life have been quietly depending on your smallness, your agreeableness, your accommodation, your willingness to require nothing, to maintain their own sense of size. When you stop shrinking, they feel the change before you even announce it, and they won't always forgive you for it. Some versions of yourself that others are attached to, the easy one, the available one, the one who made everything comfortable by making nothing of themselves. Those versions don't survive this process. That grief is real and specific and almost never discussed, because the self-help version of this story ends with everyone celebrating your authenticity. The true version is quieter. Some people leave. Some people were never there. The exit from the transaction is not triumphant. It doesn't arrive with clarity or lightness, or the sudden sensation of loving yourself. It arrives more like the closing of an account you've held for decades, the specific, permanent, undramatic relief of a person who has decided to stop running a tab. What remains after is difficult to describe cleanly. Not happiness in the conventional sense, not confidence the way it's usually performed, something more structural than both. A person who walks into a room and doesn't immediately calculate what the room requires. A person whose sense of themselves doesn't recalibrate every time someone new forms an opinion. A person who is, for the first time, the same in private as they are in public. Jung believed the goal of human existence was never approval, never achievement, never the perfection of the persona. It was wholeness. And wholeness doesn't come from becoming more likable. It comes from becoming less afraid of being known. The price of being liked was never what they took from you. It was what you paid to avoid facing yourself. And the day you stop paying it, that's not the day you become free. That's the day you realize you were the one holding the bill the entire time.